If I asked you to choose between these two options, which would you choose? A. Over the next 30 days, I will give you $1,000 a day. B. Over the next 30 days, I will give you 1 cent on the first day, 2 cents on the second day, 4 cents on the third day, 8 cents on the fourth day, and so on, duplicating every day. You have 3 seconds to decide, A or B. If you've chosen option A, congratulations! At the end of the 30 days, I'll have given you $30,000. Now, if you've chosen option B, I'll have given you $5,368,709.12. That's right. Here's the table to prove it. If you look carefully at the table, you'll see that by day 20, you'll still be thinking you made a terrible choice. But then, in those last 10 days of the month, everything changes. That's the power of exponential growth. Having a notion of exponential growth helps us understand the world in a way that is hard to do only intuitively. Let's see a couple of examples. When we hear on the news sentences like, inflation is at 10%, we don't really understand what it means. With simple math, it's easy to calculate what it means. Start with the number 70 and divide it by the growth rate in percent. In this example, 70 divided by 10% equals 7 years. So what the news is saying is that it will take only about 7 years for all the money you have now to be worth only half of what it's worth now. If you have $10,000 in the bank now, it means in 7 years, you will only have $5,000. Here's another example. If your boss promises you a 7% salary raise every year, that means it'll take you almost 10 years to double your current wages. 70 divided by 7% equals 10 years. So here's what all these mean for you. When it comes to exponential growth, do not trust your intuition. You don't have any. Accept it. We humans are evolved to understand linear growth, not exponential. What really helps is a calculator or the rule of 70, which we just discussed above. The rule of 70 is not 100% accurate. It's just a quick way to understand what the growth rates mean. The ancient Persians were well aware that people struggled with percentage growth rates. Here's an interesting story. There was once a wise courtier who presented the king with a chessboard. Moved by the gift, the king said to him, "Tell me how I can thank you." The courtier replied, "Your Highness, I want nothing more than for you to cover the chessboard with rice, putting 1 grain of rice on the first square, and then on every subsequent square, twice the previous number of grains." The king was astonished. "It's an honor to you, dear courtier, that you present such a modest request. But how much rice is that?" The king guessed about a sack. Only when his servants began the task, placing a grain on the first square, 2 grains of rice on the second square, 4 grains of rice on the third, and so on, did he realize that he would need more rice than was growing on Earth. So the lesson number 1 in this video is, never trust your intuition when it comes to exponential growth rates. Use a calculator or the rule of 70. Lesson number 2, sunk cost fallacy. When I was studying at the university, I decided to start dressing well. So one of the first things I did was buy expensive shoes. I wasn't a rich student, so it was quite a big deal for me. I went to the store with my close friend and chose the shoes together. After a few days, I realized that I didn't really like the shoes, and they felt very uncomfortable. I told my friend about the situation, and he offered to buy it for half the price, but I said no. So I kept wearing them despite the fact that they were uncomfortable and didn't really go well with the rest of my clothes. Finally, after a few weeks, I couldn't take it anymore and stopped wearing them, but always kept them on the shelf in the entrance. For years, I carried those shoes from one house to another, and for years, they occupied space on the shelf. Not just that, every time I entered or left the house, I saw them in the entrance, and they made me feel bad. But I still kept them. I couldn't simply throw them away or give them to someone. Why? Because I paid so much money for them. What happened to me is something called sunk cost fallacy. It's the tendency to value the energy we've already invested or the money we've already spent and ignore the energy or money we'll lose in the future. In other words, we keep our focus on the past instead of on the future. The sunk cost fallacy is one of the most common cognitive biases we fall victim to. For example, you have a toxic relationship, but you can't end it because you have given years to that relationship. You have old clothes in your wardrobe that you don't wear anymore, but you still keep them despite the fact that you will probably never wear them again. You buy a food that turns out to be a terrible choice, but you still eat it because you paid money for it. You have a business, but it isn't going well, but you still stick with it because you spent 2 years growing it. You buy a stock and after a few days it drops by 50% and you want to sell it, but you say to yourself, I can't sell it now because it's lost 50% of its value. This type of thinking is irrational and a perfect example for the sunk cost fallacy. How much you've paid for that stock should have no impact on your future decision whether to sell it or keep it. The acquisition price, the price you paid for it, should play no role. The only thing that you should focus on is the future performance of that stock from today on. Will it make money for you or not? Ironically, the more money an investment loses, the more likely the investors tend to stick with it, which is a mistake. Okay, now that you understand sunk cost fallacy, here's how you can apply it to your own life. Number 1, don't look back. Whether it's the price you paid for it or the time and the energy you spent, it's irrelevant. See every day as a fresh day. Number 2, if you spend time researching something, let's say a stock, don't let that time spent impact your purchase decisions. To sum up, the sunk cost fallacy is a very severe and frequent trap that we face almost every day in life, in business, and especially in investing. The past is the past. Don't let it hurt your future. Always ask yourself, does it make sense to stick with this decision starting from today or not? Number 3, conjunction fallacy. Which one of these sentences do you think is more likely to be true? A, I had 2 flat tires this morning, or B, I had 2 flat tires this morning because I drove by a construction site. So, A or B? Most people will opt for B. It's easier to believe someone had 2 flat tires if they state there was a good reason for it, right? Unfortunately, B is the wrong answer. A is more likely. Why? Well, for option A to be true, you only have one condition: 2 flat tires. Now, for option B to be true, you have to fulfill 2 conditions: 2 flat tires and driving by a construction site. The more conditions that need to be met, the less likely things are to happen. For example, a lot of people travel every year. Fewer people than that travel to Europe. Even fewer people travel to Europe on business. Even fewer travel to Europe on business at the end of the year, and so on. The more conditions that need to be met, the smaller the probability of it happening. Why do people choose B then? Because of something called the conjunction fallacy. It happens when a subset seems larger than the entire set. We are easy prey for the conjunction fallacy because we have an innate attraction to harmonious or plausible stories. If someone tells you they had 2 flat tires at the same time, you'll think, I bet they're lying. But if they give you a good story why that happened, you tend to believe them. And a lot of people use that to manipulate you. Who? Well, screenwriters and authors do that, for example. When we watch or read a story, the more detailed it is, the more believable we deem it to be. While a very general story falls flat and doesn't feel real, even though that general story is much more likely to have happened in real life than the specific one. Authors know that, so they add details to make fiction sound believable. Or somehow you see yourself crying as you watch an alien movie. Now, that's harmless manipulation. You know who else uses that to manipulate you? Salespeople, politicians, gurus. So what can you do to avoid being manipulated? With important decisions, remember that we have a soft spot for plausible stories. When someone tries to tell you a story in order to convince you of something, watch out for convenient details and happy endings. Remember, people will use any strategy they can to get you to do what they want. 4. Illusion of attention. In the 1990s, Harvard cognitive psychologists Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris filmed 2 teams of students passing basketballs back and forth. In the video, one team wore black t-shirts, the other white ones. Viewers were asked to count how many times the players in the white t-shirts passed the ball. Both teams move in circles, weaving in and out, passing back and forth. In the middle of the video, something bizarre happens. A student dressed as a gorilla walks into the center of the room, pounds his chest, and promptly disappears again. When the video ends, you are asked if you noticed the gorilla. Half the viewers shake their heads in astonishment. Gorilla? What gorilla? Now, if you know a gorilla is coming, you'll probably see it because your attention will be half on the players in the white t-shirts, half expecting the gorilla to show up. But if you have no idea, then your attention is so focused on counting that you'll probably miss everything else. This is how it works in life too. You think you're attentive and perceptive and taking in everything that goes on around you. But the truth is that you only notice properly the things that have your attention focused on. Life is as hectic as that video with basketball players and the gorilla. Something unusual can be huge, but we may still not see it. Being big and distinctive is not enough to be seen. The unusual and huge thing must be expected in order to be seen. This means that there might be huge things happening in your life right now that you're failing to notice, just because you're not looking out for them. For example, have you ever heard someone say, "I used to work so much that I didn't notice my marriage was falling apart. I almost couldn't save it." You might think, how could they not notice their marriage problems? It's such a big part of our lives, isn't it? Well, their attention was just completely focused on something else. That was work. So it's possible that they really didn't notice what was going on in the other aspects of their lives. The same might happen with our children, our careers, or our health. That is the reason we look back on our younger selves and say, "I can't believe I did that," or "I can't believe I didn't see that coming." To make sure the illusion of attention doesn't affect you more than you would like, here are a few exercises you can try. 1. Before you have an important event, confront unexpected scenarios. For example, what would you do if 2 of your managers started a big argument during your presentation tomorrow? Imagining absurd scenarios might help you see things from a different point of view and broaden your attention. 2. Meditate. Meditation helps you stay focused and clear-headed. 3. If you feel someone is trying to convince you or manipulate you but you can't see why, hold back and wonder what they are not saying. Pay attention to silences as much as to noises. 4. Be in the present. Avoid allowing your mind to wander and try to think more about the events and people around you now than the past or the future. 5. Decision fatigue and information bias. Making decisions is exhausting even when they're nice decisions. Have you ever tried to choose a hotel based on their comparisons on travel websites? Planning a trip is a perfect example of a positive situation that leaves us completely exhausted after all the comparing, analyzing, and choosing. This is called decision fatigue. Decision fatigue can be used against you. Many companies know that. If they get you tired of trying to choose between their products, you might end up not buying anything. They don't want that to happen, and that's why companies and stores are very selective about which products they offer you and very dedicated to facilitating your decision process. And here's where it gets dangerous to you. If you're tired because of decision fatigue, you get more susceptible to advertising and convincing. A persuasive sales clerk, and that's it. You've made an impulse buy you'll definitely regret later. So what can you do? If possible, choose to make important decisions in the morning when you are rested. If you can, choose mornings for situations where other people will have to decide things for you too, such as asking your boss for a salary raise. Make sure that your head and body are rested when you go shopping. The same goes for going to the bank or any other place where you'll have to make important decisions. Be always aware that the more options and choices you offer, the less likely that people will choose or take an action. When it comes to choices, less is more. For example, if I ask you to like this video, comment, subscribe to my channel, and share this video, it's more likely that you won't do any of it. I have a higher success rate if I ask just one thing, such as, if you're enjoying this video, hit that like button. 6. Social loafing. Have you ever noticed that if you are in a meeting with 3 people, you are much more likely to participate in the discussion compared to a meeting with 20 people? This is not only about shyness or exposure, it also happens because our brain understands that the more people working for a certain goal, the smaller each person's share of the effort needs to be. Scientists call this effect social loafing. It occurs when individual performance blends into the group effort and becomes smaller the more people the group has. You might think that in your department meetings, those who don't participate in the discussions are lazy. That's not the case. Social loafing is unconscious, and it happens even with animals, such as horses pulling on a wagon, for example. One horse is going to make a bigger effort to pull the wagon if it's alone than it would if it had another horse's help. Now that you know that, what can you do? If you're a leader, prefer to have small meetings with smaller sectors of your company instead of a big one. In case it's impossible, split the big team into smaller groups, as small as possible. If you want teamwork to be present in your company, assemble multi-specialization teams. For example, instead of having a team with marketing staff members, another team of economists, and a different one with developers, make sure each team has a marketing guy, an economist, and a developer, and that they work together instead of with other people with the same specialization as they do. If you're part of a group, make sure you and your team define specific individual tasks, so you make individual performances as visible as possible. This way your team won't be able to rely on 1 or 2 members to complete the task. 7. Simple logic. I'll ask you 2 questions. Pause the video if you have to, but don't cheat. Just go with the answer and the logic that comes to your mind. First question. In a department store, a ping pong paddle and a plastic ball cost $1.10. If the paddle costs $1 more than the ball, how much is the ball? Second question. In a textile factory, 5 machines take exactly 5 minutes to make 5 shirts. How many minutes will it take 100 machines to produce 100 shirts? Now, for each of these questions, there's an intuitive answer. Maybe these intuitive answers come to your mind quickly as you listened to the questions. 10 cents and 100 minutes. But these are the wrong answers. The correct ones are 5 cents and 5 minutes. The reason why our brain first thinks of the intuitive but wrong answers is obvious. We basically focus on the fact that the word 5 was repeated. So we repeat the words 100 too before we even think about it. Here's the scientific explanation. Thinking is more exhausting than sensing, so we tend to give in to intuition unless more effort is really required. This is quite easy to understand, but how it affects your life is harder to guess. Our intuition often prevents us from analyzing questions further, making us decide things based on emotion more than logic. This is true not only for silly logic problems, but also for big life decisions. So what can you do? If you feel very strongly about a subject, don't give in to intuition. Stop for a minute and ask yourself if you're allowing your emotions to cloud your logic. When you're shopping, a sales clerk might act hurriedly to influence you to make impulse purchases before you have time to think about them. Sales websites do this too by setting sales countdowns such as, "You have 3 minutes to enjoy this discounted price." Remember, you don't have to decide anything in a hurry. Even if your intuition tells you to buy something, take a few minutes to think about it logically. But never forget, not everything can be decided with logic, and sometimes it even shouldn't be done. If you've tried but can't find a logical reason to ignore a strong intuition, don't ignore it. Our emotions are also fine-tuned to protect us. 8. Social comparison bias. Let's suppose you work as a secretary. You are very aware of your skills and flaws. For example, you know that you are extremely organized and a great speaker, but you're still struggling with your French speaking skills and you're not very detail-oriented. One day, your boss realizes that you've been overloaded, and in order to relieve the burden on your shoulders, he asks for your help to hire another secretary, someone who will be your assistant from now on. The first candidate, Jordan, is a little clumsy and nervous, but he's very organized, just like you, and he admits he completely relates to your struggle with French. The second candidate, Barbara, looked very confident, and has been fluently speaking French with your boss ever since she stepped foot into the office. When your boss asks you who you like the most, do you choose Jordan or Barbara? If you're like most people, you've chosen Jordan, the clumsy, insecure candidate who poses no threat to your job because his French is as poor as yours. You might think this decision comes from insecurity, competitiveness, envy, smartness, or even from fear. Yes, those can be factors in play, but it all starts with the social comparison bias, the tendency to withhold assistance to people who might outdo you, even if you end up being harmed in the long run. But you're just caring for your job, you might say. Well, tell yourself that when your company starts losing all their clients from French-speaking countries because you failed to communicate properly with them. Social comparison bias is harmful to companies, to science, and even to friendships and love relationships. Guy Kawasaki, a business advisor, says, A players hire people even better than themselves. B players hire C players so they can feel superior to them. And C players hire D players. In other words, if you start hiring B players, expect you'll end up with Z players. What can you do then? Hire people who are better than you as often as you can. Help people thrive. The more you help others, the better the world around you becomes. You'll reap the consequences of that too. Be happy with other people's success. Your friend is making more money than you? Great! Your coworker has been promoted? Awesome! The best thing to do is to learn from them so you can be more successful too. And that was the last one. Thanks for watching until the end. Have a nice day.